who really ignited the true fire of slavery. There are certain chapters of history that weren't simply forgotten, they were hidden. And when you start pulling the threads, you realize that the history of slavery, the one most people learn, is only a fragment, a convenient slice, an isolated piece of a much larger puzzle. Today, we're going into a part of history many people avoid, not because it's irrelevant, but because it's uncomfortable. And like everything uncomfortable, it tends to be buried. When we talk about slavery, the image that usually comes to mind is simple. Europeans arriving in Africa and taking people by force. That happened, and it was brutal. But that is not the whole story. The truth is that centuries before Portugal even existed as a country, and long before any Europeans set foot on the African coast, consolidated systems of enslavement already existed. Kingdoms, empires, and fortified cities took part in networks of human capture and trade that crossed the desert and reached North Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. And here's the point that almost never appears in school textbooks: African slavery did not begin with Europe. It was already deeply rooted in the continent and interconnected with the Arab world for more than 800 years. Today, when people hear about European slaves, many assume it's a conspiracy theory. But that's simply the result of an intentional historical erasure. For centuries, especially between the years 700 and 1400, entire populations of the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal, and Spain were enslaved by Islamic kingdoms of North Africa, largely made up of Berber and Islamized African peoples. Not dozens, not hundreds, but centuries. From 710 to 1492, almost 800 years, there were waves of capture, servitude, and trade of white Europeans, men, women, and children. This isn't opinion, it's recorded history, but rarely mentioned. Why? Because it contradicts the simplified narrative that dominates modern debate. When the Portuguese reached the African coast in the 15th century, they didn't invent slavery. They entered a system already in full operation. Kingdoms such as Benin, Dahomey, Oyo, Ashanti had entire social structures based on capturing rival peoples. Public markets sold prisoners of war, convicts, debtors, and foreigners. There was domestic slavery, military slavery, agricultural slavery, and extremely violent forms that many history classes simply leave out. Did European firearms, textiles, and metals expand this system? Yes, a lot, but they did not create it. This is the most avoided point in current debates. The Atlantic slave trade only reached the scale it did because African elites actively collaborated. War chiefs, rulers, and local merchants supplied captives in exchange for weapons and high-value goods. Without this participation, no European ship would have been able to approach many regions of the continent. But that is precisely the aspect most erased, because it transforms a innocents versus villains narrative into something more complex, harder to fit into modern slogans. Another common simplification is imagining Africa as a single unified entity. It wasn't. Some kingdoms profited enormously from the slave trade. Others resisted fiercely. King Afonso I of the Old Kingdom of Congo tried to limit or even ban the trade with the Portuguese. Entire communities fled and formed free territories. Some peoples broke alliances with Arabs and Europeans to avoid the capture of their own members. The real history of Africa is made of alliances, internal wars, resistance, negotiations, and rivalries. There was no single side. There was politics, interest, and power. So did Europeans have no blame? They did. And here we must be clear. Europe industrialized, globalized, and expanded slavery to a monstrous scale. It created the transatlantic slave trade, turned people into global merchandise, and built economic structures that depended on it. European responsibility is enormous. But claiming that slavery was created by Europeans, that is a falsification of history. Why was all this hidden? Because simplified narratives are useful. They're easy to repeat. They create clear villains, clear victims, and easy stories to teach. Complexity is uncomfortable. It shows that no civilization was entirely innocent, no people were immune to the temptations of power, and human history is made of choices, good and bad, on every continent. Admitting this takes away the comfort of modern discourse. That's why much of it was silenced. What remains from all this? A simple but powerful conclusion. The real history of slavery is global, ancient, and profoundly human, not a Hollywood movie with heroes and villains. When we understand the full truth, we stop infantilizing entire civilizations. We restore agency to those who were reduced to background characters, and we stop repeating chopped-up narratives crafted to fit modern agendas. The history of slavery is not comfortable, and it was never meant to be. It is a mirror of humanity, with all its shadows, interests, downfalls, and tragedies, long before Europe reached the Atlantic. And understanding this is not justification, it is clarity, because only when we see the entire story can we truly step out of the matrix.
Did you like the video? Then subscribe to the channel